Marionette. What? Can you guys just stand up, because we do want to honor you guys. Really, this is their initiative to kind of gather. I mean, we spread the word through our Hillsong network, churches that kind of, connect in, lean in, want to learn and grow together, because we're always going to do a whole lot more when we choose to work together than to work separate. And, Paul and Marionette were like, Paul's calling me really annoying, actually, because he just keeps calling. He's like, I got this idea. We should, launch ARC. And obviously I'm, know Chris Hodges and aware of what ARC has been doing. And he's like, we need to do this in South Africa. And, he's just so passionate about this deal of planting churches. And, when someone is so passionate, it's very hard not to be swept up in that passion. And, that's our heart. We believe that there is no one church that's going to reach South Africa. We need a whole lot, of healthy, life-giving churches to reach this nation and to reach Africa. And hello to my friends from Zambia. I met them before the service. Where are the guys there? Over here. So awesome. People came from a long way. Maybe someone came from Paro. I mean, that is, guys from Paro, well done. Paradise. Thanks for making the effort to be here. But really excited about, where we're going with this. And my prayer is that this is going to help all of us in whatever stage we're at with our churches. Your mind's going to be blown by Chris Hodges. Can I just get you ready for that? We've had Pastor Chris with us over this weekend, and just been phenomenal, just what he's taught. And whether it was in a session or whether it was just chatting, more in the conversations, it's like my mind is still hurting. But it's a good hurt, when it's like you're in pain, but it's actually beneficial for you. So that's where we're at. So be ready for that. This is kind of a day which is around growing. And so my message today is just simply about growth and fruitfulness, because that's what I believe we are all called to be about. John 15, verse 1 and verse 2 says this: I am the true vine, this is Jesus speaking, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes so that it will bear more fruit. Now, let's just stop and look at that for a moment. Jesus says, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes so that it may bear more fruit. So what that says to me, just as we get started, and what a great start this is going to be, is it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to get cut. Isn't that just encouraging? We want it to grow. We want a church full of people. We want, great praise and work. We want happy excitement, and we're going to get cut one way or the other. Now, there's a way that is going to cause you to grow, and there's a way that is because you're not growing. I want the way that's going to cause me to grow more. And that's the challenge. That's what Jesus is putting out to us. And in fact, then it goes on a little bit further in John 15:16, and Jesus says, you did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you so that you may what? Go and bear fruit. So there is a purpose to the choice Jesus made in choosing you. There is a purpose to your existence. There is a purpose to our churches, our ministry. And what is it? It is that we go and bear fruit. Fruit that will last. So that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. We can start off by saying today that any growth is painful. In any area of life, growth is painful. If your church is going to keep on growing, it is going to be painful. You know why? Because it's going to mean you have to do things that you're not doing now, and it's going to mean you have to stop doing things that you are doing now, and that's going to be painful because there are people in your church who are not going to like it. That's the bottom line, but that is what we have to be prepared for if we are going to grow. If there is growth in my life in any area, there are areas that I have to stop doing what I was doing, and there are things that I have to start doing that I wasn't doing if I want that area of my life to grow. That is just a principle. So here's the question: what is fruit? What does fruit look like? What does fruit look like? Because we hear fruit and we think, what does that mean? Does that mean more people? Does that mean more decisions? What is fruit? Well, here's my definition of fruit that I've found to be helpful and might help you. Fruit is this. Fruit is always for others and the next generation. I want you to think about that, because a tree, apple tree, for example, if an apple tree produces an apple, the apple is not for the apple tree. The apple is for others to benefit from. And what is inside that apple? Inside that apple are seeds, and the seeds in the apple are, what are they for? They are for the next generation of apple trees. So in my mind, as I read this, Jesus is challenging us that if we're going to bear fruit that remains, our fruit needs to be not just for ourselves, it needs to be for others. So what are we doing to make sure our church, our leadership, our ministry is outward focusing? What are we doing so it's not just about us four and no more our little church experience? It needs to be for others and the next generation. Church is only as strong as the next generation. And the reality is that some churches aren't what they were, and the only reason that's happening is because no one invested in the next generation. So the fruit, I believe, that God's looking for in our lives is, how does our church connect with, influence, impact, reach out to others, and what are we doing for the next generation? That needs to be central to the fruit of what we're about as a church. So here's what I've also learned when it comes to this, is that previous growth does not determine present or future growth. That just because we started well, and there's nothing more exciting than launching a church, and I know there's going to be more people who talk about that, and obviously, we launched our church, it's over 9 years ago now, and we've been launching different locations. There's nothing more exciting than launching a location when you put the effort into, and there's the buzz, and there's the excitement, and everyone is, they're loving it, and wow, that's great. But let me tell you, that's just one Sunday. There's going to be another one, and another one, and there's not going to be the same excitement, and there's not going to be the same, everyone, wow, we're launching something new. It's going to be the same. It's going to be back in the same building. It's going to be the same musicians. It's going to be the same, so many things are going to be the same. So just because it was like, wow, we had that moment, doesn't mean it's going to keep on growing. There are things you have to do to create sustainable growth. So just a few things that I want us to consider today. How do we continue to grow in our life, in our leadership, and in our churches? Firstly is this, and again, you're gonna love this message. I'm just setting it up, so it's just going to be just a really happy, fun day. So you can thank me for that. Make frustration your friend. That's my first point. I know, isn't that great? Make frustration your friend. My daughter, I've got two teenage daughters. Pray for me. They're awesome and slightly judgmental with regarding to outfits that their parents wear. In fact, I've been banned from mentioning them from the pulpit when they're in the room. Now I just talk about how my wife and I run an Airbnb, and we have 3 boarders who stay with us regularly, and in fact, we've just started an Uber service exclusively for these Airbnb. We've given them an education. We've really helped them in their lives. Don't know who they are, just showed up one day. Anyway, when my daughter was a whole lot younger, she came home from school, and she had this bag of seeds. And she's like, Dad, I've got some seeds for some vegetables. Can we plant these in the backyard? And I'm like, okay, let's do that. So we found a little spot in the backyard, and we kind of dug some little holes, planted them, and then covered the dirt over, and then we watered them, and then she stood there. She's I don't know, 5 or something like that, and she's looking, and she's waiting, and she's still looking. And I'm like, hey, babe, I that's about all we're going to see today. Let's go inside. So we go inside. Then the next day after school, come outside. She's like, let's water them. So we water them. And then she just stares, literally. She just stares. She's waiting for something to happen. And nothing happens. I'm like, look, it's probably not going to happen. Not much more is going to happen today. Let's go inside. We do this every day for the week. By the time it gets to Friday afternoon, she's been doing this all week. We get to Friday, she waters it, she looks down, and then literally she just shouts, "Grow!" And I laughed, but then I thought, we do that, don't we? We look down and we've watered and it's in the ground and we're wondering, why isn't it growing? Because we've done everything we're supposed to do and we want to see the immediate results. But what I've realized is that there's a process to this, and there's frustration in that process. And if I make frustration my friend in these moments, then I trust God in this, then I learn through the process and I grow through the process. Frustration is something that will always help you to understand a bigger picture, okay? It will teach you about yourself, all right? It will teach you about your own areas that you need to deal with, and that is part of the process that is going on inside of whatever church, whatever ministry you're leading. The bottom line is that church or ministry will only ever grow as far as you're prepared to grow. And so if what are you doing with frustration? Because for a lot of people, frustration is simply something that causes us to give up. Frustration is something that causes us to go, well, we tried and it didn't work, so we're not going to do that again. It's all right for them. It may have worked for them, but it doesn't work for us in our context and what we're doing and the way we're doing it. And we disqualify ourselves from things because we got frustrated. Frustration can do two things. Okay, frustration can cause you to either quit, respond poorly, or make bad decisions. Okay, because you're in a place of frustration. And we can all get there. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what your church is or stage or whatever. We can all get frustrated, and it can cause us to want to quit things. It can cause us to make bad decisions, and it can cause us to respond poorly to the situation we're in. But if we understand that part of the growth process is frustrating, then, and we make it our friend, we can learn from it, and it can teach me something. See, I think some people have this idea that Hillsong I don't know. It's always interesting for me to talk about our church from the perspective of how other people see it. But I don't always think people understand sometimes anything that is growing has been built on dealing with frustration. For a long time, our church in Sydney was 14 years before it had its own building. I was part of the church from when it was 2 or 3 years old. And I remember we would have rosters. And I don't know if your church has rosters, but we have rosters. How exciting are rosters? Again, I'm talking about things that are really exciting today. But we would have rosters, and I managed to find myself on certain rosters. So my wife, Lucinda, and I, we were running the youth ministry. The youth ministry was on Saturday night, and we would be rostered on to close the building, lock it up at the end of youth on a Saturday night. Not only that, Pastor Brian had just decided to venture into television. He had a TV program on one of the channels in the Sydney television network. The only slot that we could as a church afford and that was available was at 4 a.m. Here's the thing, there was a prayer line. If you needed prayer, call this number. There was a roster for who was on the other end of the prayer line. So, we could be rostered on youth, running youth Saturday night, packing down, closing up the building. Then you could manage, if you hit the jackpot, to be rostered on to answer the phone back at church at 4 a.m. for all the amazing people who call a number like that at 4 a.m. Because you know they're great people who really want to get saved. They don't have any issues. They're not insomniacs. They haven't been out smoking drugs, drinking, and who knows whatever else all night and then switched on the television and thought, I need to call that number. I mean, you're going to have real legitimate conversations of salvation with these people. And we'd be rostered on. So we'd have locked up, gone home, rostered on. There was also another roster. We'd be rostered on for that for half an hour. There was also another roster. That was the alarm roster. Anyone know about the alarm roster? The alarm roster is when the alarm goes off, whoever is rostered on has to go to the building to check that everything's fine. Yes, it's okay. Relock everything up. Okay, now, if you hit the triple jackpot, you got Saturday night youth, you got the alarm going off somewhere at around 2 a.m. that you'd have to go down and check it out, and then you got the privilege of going back at 4 a.m. to answer the phone calls of weird people who God loves but no one else does. And you had to go through all of this, but then there's another roster. We had lots of rosters. Because we didn't have our own building, we had the set up and pack down roster. And so you would get to where all the gear was, you'd be rostered on to be there at 6 a.m. So you'd have, again, if you quadruple bonus, you got the Saturday nights packed, lock the building up. You got the alarm going off at 2 a.m. You were back at 4 a.m. to answer the crazy people. You got home and then you went back to be on the setup team to make church happen. You hit the jackpot. Can you imagine? I mean, that was sometimes our evenings and mornings. And then you'd have to be in the front row at church for the 8:30 a.m. service, all excited and happy and praising Jesus. See, but not only that, we had other rosters as well. When we moved into our own building, we got a roster here. And this is therapeutic for me, so this is why I'm telling you this. We got put on a roster, and that roster was the alarm for the whole building, lock the doors of this, because we had our first building, and there were alarm codes for all different regions. And this was at a time, you were the last person. You're on lockup. You got to lock up the whole building. You got to go through every area, and you go downstairs. You go to, check the building to lock it up, and there's one area that won't go yes because in the kids' ministry, they left a window open somewhere, and you're going back around the building. And then sometimes, this was when there was, I don't know if you were in the flow where there was the revival service where people would get slain in the spirit. And, because we didn't want to do that in the other service, so we added an extra service for all the, seeker, soaker people. And so we'd have this later service, all right, which Pastor Brian didn't go to, but he'd roster other people on to be at. Yeah, we know how you roll, lead pastors. We know how it works. And that would be, and you know what? There'd be one guy who'd be out under the power of God, and you want to lock up the building, and he's not moving. You're thinking, I'm just dragging him outside. Because if it's God, he's going to be okay. I mean, shouldn't that be the truth? Finally, you lock that up. And then you all go to Hillsong Conference, think this is amazing. Guess what? There's a roster for Hillsong Conference. There's a pastoral care roster. And there's a pastoral care roster after Hillsong Conference when everyone's worked really hard. Then, it's like, hey, stuff, you can have a few days off, but you're on the pastoral care roster, which means if there's a pastoral emergency, someone's going to call you for a pastoral emergency. Okay, if your number's on there, you know what the calls you usually get? You get calls from America. I know we've got Americans in the room. You get calls from America saying, I was at Hillsong Conference. And I lost my Bible. Pastoral emergency. It's an emergency because Darlene Check signed my Bible. Do you think you know where my Bible is? I'll see what I can do. Thank you. God bless you. Enjoy the United States of America. We would have all these rosters, and can I tell you, in all of these different rosters, doing all of these different things, do you think there weren't moments of frustration? And I didn't always handle them well. I didn't always have a good attitude and a good spirit. But you know what I realized? The better my attitude, the better my spirit, it wasn't going to change the roster, but it was going to change me, and it was going to cause me to grow. And if I could grow through the process of the frustration, then maybe I could teach someone, and maybe through that process, somehow what I'm called to lead and to build is going to grow. Because frustration happens in a whole lot of different ways. And if I don't make it my friend, then it's going to mess me up. You get frustrated because people leave church. You get frustrated because some people came to your church. You get all kinds of frustrations, don't you? You thought they'd gone because Hillsong opened up. You're like, thank you, goodbye. And they only stayed a few months and they came back. And we went, thank you, goodbye. And you get all these frustrations. But you got to learn to deal with the frustration. Because the frustrations are ultimately doing something inside of you. Like, I think of Nelson Mandela. And I think of what he went through. I mean, I can't get my head around it. 27 years in prison. The amount of frustration which could have led to all kinds of response, which would not be healthy. And as much as there are challenges in this nation today, it would not be where it is today if he had responded differently to what he had been frustrated about. But what I believe is that frustration became his friend and made him the leader that he became. Because he used it in a way that changed him and made him a better man. Maybe more of our presidents should spend longer in prison. Just a thought. Wipe it from the tape. Because sometimes, you know what frustration will do? Frustration will cause you to value something a whole lot more. When you understand what it cost you, when you understand what you went through to get there, when you understand it was painful, it hurt, this person didn't understand. I thought they were going to be there and they weren't. I thought these guys were going to contribute and they didn't. I thought this money was going to come in here and it didn't, and you get frustrated. It isn't working the way you thought it would. And if you can learn to make frustration your friend, it will make you a better person. And I believe ultimately a better leader for all that God's called you to. Okay, the second deal here, and these kind of flow together, is you've got to learn to embrace the process. So you got to make frustration your friend, and in the midst of that, you got to embrace there's a process. The process. There's always a process to growth. I don't know if you're familiar with a guy who I read an article about, and it was a little bit of his story. A guy named Heston Blumenthal. Anyone know who he is? Any of the foodies in the room? He is a renowned, famous, celebrity chef. Has a restaurant called The Fat Duck. He's obviously not a very creative name type guy, but his food's creative. One of the top 3 restaurants in the world in its day, and Michelin stars. I mean, this guy, incredible. One of the first guys. They call him the mad scientist of cuisine, the way he does food. Here's the thing about him. He was self-taught. He didn't go to culinary school. And they asked him this question. They said, why is it that you became a chef? And how is it that you do things the way you do them? And he said, well, it actually all began when I was 16. I think 15 or 16. He said, my parents took me to a Michelin star restaurant in Provence in France. And he said, I remember everything about the experience. He says, I remember the crunch of the gravel walking up to this beautiful building. He said, I remember the smell of the lavender that was just outside the front door. He said, I remember walking in and being greeted by the wait staff and this waiter with this handlebar mustache, dressed impeccably, inviting us to our seat and explaining the meal. He said, and then the food. He goes, it was like nothing I had ever tasted in my life before. And he says, as we left after that evening, he said, I said to myself, I want to be part of this world. He had a profound impact in him as a 16-year-old from experiencing something that had an incredible process to where he got what he got. Now here's the thought. Have you ever been to McDonald's? Yep. It's honesty moment. Yeah, it's okay. We're real people. Sunday nights after church, I know you're feeling low and you're like, I'm just going to get the cheeseburger. I don't care. You've ever been to McDonald's? Have you ever, when you've left McDonald's, you know where I'm going? Made this statement, I want to be part of this world. You probably, if you've said that, we probably should pray for you after this. You probably haven't said that. Why? Because it doesn't get you like that. And here's the question, because when I read that, it made me think, what are we doing with our churches? Because I want people to come into church and I want them to have the kind of experience because of the process that we've been through that causes them to say, I've never experienced anything like this before. I want to be part of this world. That requires a whole lot more process than McDonald's, which is we turn up, we get a meal, and we go. And I don't want our church experience just to be that. I want it to be more than that. But if it's going to be more than that, it's going to require more of a process. It's going to require more time, energy, and effort in me understanding what are we trying to do here and through this. And so the process is so important. In fact, sometimes, you can be involved in a process and you can be doing what you know is right and working hard on that, and you've got to keep adjusting the process as you go. And you've got to trust in that, and that's what I love, hearing from guys like Pastor Chris Hodges, because he's a process guy. And he's going to challenge us about the process of how we do church. And I think sometimes, there is quick growth. There are quick ways that you can grow something. There's quick diets that you can go on. You know what I mean? Like extreme. You can do some extreme things and you can get some quick results, but it doesn't usually last. Or you can build the right processes into your life, into your church, into your leadership, and as you build the right processes over time, you will have sustainable growth because you've developed a process that works. And you can change the process if you have to, but you're building something that last. You've got to embrace the process. We often don't like it. We want this to happen now. We want that to happen now. We want to build the building now. We want to do this. And there is a process. And if you would embrace the process, it is what will ultimately cause you to have the growth that you desire to see. Okay, just got a few moments left. Final thought that I want to share with you today about growth and fruitfulness is take extreme ownership. Everyone in this room, and I made this statement, but let me make it again. If you lead the church can only grow as far as you're prepared to grow. And that's the truth for our church, for Hillsong Church in South Africa. Lucinda and I, if we are not committed to continuing to grow, continuing to learn, continuing to find out ways to better who we are and better how we do what we do with our team and all the different aspects, it's not going to grow. Now, I'm all for prayer, and I believe in praying for our church and praying for our nation. But can I tell you, if I'm just praying and I'm not taking any ownership in any other form, then I don't see how you're going to have sustained growth. Okay? It's just a thought, and you know, you may have another way of doing it. That's great. But I've realized in our church that if I don't own it, whatever it is, then it's not going to grow. I've got to take the ownership. I cannot blame. See, the opposite of extreme ownership is to blame everyone else for why things are the way they are. I can blame the culture. I can blame the church down the road. I can blame this leader. I can blame the economic climate. I can find a way. If you want to, you can find a way to blame, and that's fine. Do that, but you won't grow. Okay? If you want to see growth, you have to get rid of all the excuses, and you have to commit to taking extreme ownership for what you are doing. There's a book that I would recommend you to read called Extreme Ownership by a guy named Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL, and he led a team that was the most decorated Navy SEAL platoon in the Iraqi conflict. And you may have heard of Chris Kyle, the movie American Sniper. He was on their team. These guys coined this term, extreme ownership. And what they said was, whenever they went on mission, they were not going to blame anyone else. They were not going to blame their commanding officer if they didn't get the information that they needed, that they thought they needed. They weren't going to blame the Iraqi soldiers who they were working with, who were not trained to the level that they were trained. They weren't going to blame them. They weren't going to blame the area in which the combat would take place, which was very difficult to actually get an understanding of what was really going on. They weren't going to blame that. They were going to take complete ownership for everything on that mission, whether it succeeded or whether it failed. They're taking ownership. And because of that, they saw more, they achieved more than any other group. And so my question to all of us in building church, it is easy to find reasons and blame. And maybe things aren't growing right now. But rather than just blaming and using this excuse and that excuse, just stop it and say, okay, I'm not going to talk about all the excuses. I'm just going to talk about what I can do. And I'm going to focus on what I can do. Okay, here's one of their thoughts as I conclude, and this will really hurt because it hurt me. There's no such thing as a bad leader. Sorry, there's no such thing as a bad team, just bad leaders. There's no such thing as a bad team, just bad leaders. You can go, well, no, I don't agree because you don't have an associate pastor like I have. I mean, really, you don't know what my worship leader's like. You don't know what this. You don't understand what I have to put up with. Well, who put them there? These guys do this. They talk about how when they left active duty, they started training the next group of Navy SEALs. So what they would do is they would put them on all these different routines, and they do this thing called Hell Week, and you may have heard about it. And one of the things that they would do is they'd put them in groups of around 8, teams of 8, and they'd place a team leader over each of the teams. And then they'd have to work with one of those inflatable rubber ducky kind of boats. And they'd have to do all kinds of drills and all kinds of, fake missions. So they might all have to grab it. They might have to row out into the middle of the ocean in the middle of the night. Everyone jump out, then everyone get back in, then all row back in, then carry it up on the sand. I mean, really difficult things. And it was difficult situations. It was cold water. It was the middle of the night. And they do all of these different activities. And what they were watching this, and there was one group, let's call them Team 4, and Team 4 kept winning everything. Kept winning everything. And then they noticed another group, let's call them Team 7, and Team 7 was losing everything. And Team 7 was, you could tell, I mean, their heads were down, there was no conversation, there was no communication, they were just doing their thing and just, trying to get by, and there was nothing about their body language that suggested that things were going to change. So they stopped the whole challenge after they'd witnessed a range of these activities. They called the team leader from Team 4 and the team leader from Team 7 out. And you know what they did? Swapped teams. After they swapped teams, Team 7, which was coming last, started coming first. And Team 4 continued to stay towards the top because of the culture within that team that had been introduced by the previous leader. See, there's no bad teams. There's just bad leaders. And if I'm prepared to take extreme ownership, I believe God's going to give me wisdom to work out how to build a healthy team that will take our church forward. Awesome being with you. I hope that helps someone. God bless. Back to Paul.